One of the most important moments in A Song of Ice and Fire was the battle at the Tower of Joy. After the rebellion ended with the death of Rhaegar, Mad King Aerys, and the crowning of Robert Baratheon as king, Ned went on a little journey down to Dorne to retrieve his sister Lyanna Stark, who many believed was kidnapped by the Dragon Prince. Here, he confronted the members of the Kingsguard, stationed here in defense by Prince Rhaegar himself. In the show, it was only Gerald Hightower and Arthur Dayne who were here, but in the books, it was Gerald Hightower, the Lord Commander, who was much older in the books, Arthur Dayne, and a guy called Oswell Went. But who Ned's end up fighting doesn't exactly matter as much as who he ends up fighting here with. In canon, Ned came down with a few buddies from the north, the most important of the bunch being Howland Reed, who was a pretty good friend of Ned and Lyanna's. He was also the reason that Ned even survived the encounter in the first place, because he stabbed Arthur Dayne in the back. And this was pretty much the perfect storm for baby Jon that allows for him to survive and live out his life as a bastard at Winterfell, relatively safe, away from the dangers of being Rhaegar's son, falling into the hands of his mother's brother and one of their friends, who may have also kept the secret of his origins as a Targaryen prince after all these years. But what if things were different? What if there was another more violent storm present during the Tower of Joy? Another friend of Ned Stark's who might not have received the son of Rhaegar Targaryen so openly? What if Robert Baratheon, the usurper of the Iron Throne, went and fought with his friend Ned at the Tower of Joy? Now, before we get into that, I think we need to acknowledge why Robert was even here to begin with. In the books, though Robert did beat Rhaegar on the Trident, it wasn't a flawless victory. While Robert was a formidable opponent, being over 6 feet tall and made of pure muscle, Prince Rhaegar was a pretty solid fighter in his own right. And in the books, he left Robert fairly injured during their confrontation. This is why Ned ends up arriving at King's Landing before his best friend, and why he later ends up being the one to lift the siege off of Stannis too. Robert is still licking his wounds from the encounter. It was also after lifting the siege off of Stannis at Storm's End that Ned found out where Lyanna actually was, and since Robert was still all the way in King's Landing, most likely still recovering as well, he couldn't exactly join Ned on his adventure. So if we want him being at the Tower of Joy to be more plausible for this story, I think the best way to go about it is to say that he's less injured than he was in canon. Rhaegar still puts up a fight and hurts him, but not to the point where he's basically out of commission the whole time that Ned's doing his thing. That's really the only change I see needing to be made when it comes to making this alternate timeline possible. Because from what we know about Robert, when it comes to Lyanna, he was pretty obsessed with her. The way he frames it, she was the love of his life. And though it can be debated whether or not he was actually in love with her or just in love with the idea of her, Ned even remarks in the first book that Robert didn't actually know or understand Lyanna, it is still very clear that Lyanna meant something to Robert. She meant a lot at the very least. So much so that even years after her death, he never got over her, never moved on with his new wife, Cersei Lannister, and didn't even try to love her.
Was it ever possible for us? Was there ever a time, ever a moment?
No.
With that being said, in a situation where Robert is willing and more able-bodied, I don't think it would take much for him to be able to tag along with Ned to the Tower of Joy. After all, Lyanna is the woman he's supposed to marry. So the way I'm tackling this is that with a healthier Robert, he essentially is able to tag along with Ned from the very start. He goes with Ned to claim the Iron Throne initially, and possibly follows him down to Storm's End to help out Stannis. Then from there, the two learn about the Tower of Joy, and they head there together to save Lyanna. Now, before that happens though, I could see there being some potential resistance on Ned's part when it comes to Robert joining him, given that around this point in the story, he and Robert weren't exactly on the best of terms. Ned was pretty angry about what the Lannisters did to Elia Martell and her children, and he wanted them punished, but Robert pretty much let it all slide. So there is a bit of a divide between them that could cause Ned to try and distance himself from Robert, maybe even trying to send him back to King's Landing because he is king now, and his authority is needed in the capital. But at the end of the day, with that being said, I don't see this being the biggest issue for them to work together, since this is Lyanna they're talking about. Ned may want some distance from his friend, but at the end of the day, they share a love for his sister. So that could potentially close the gap between them so they can get things done to save his sister. Now, this is where the real meat and potatoes of the story ends up happening. I think the confrontation of the Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy pretty much goes the same. Everyone gets taken out with the exception of Ned, Robert, and Howland Reed. Arthur Dayne will still die even if he is regarded as the best fighter of his time. Ned and Robert should be able to hold their own together against him, especially if this is Robert in his prime, even if he is still somewhat injured from his fight with Rhaegar. And if Howland Reed pulls off that backstab like he did in the show, then it's a wrap for the Sword of the Morning. So Ned and Robert head inside and find Lyanna, and subsequently a baby Jon Snow, who will then be handed off to Ned while Robert stands dumbstruck at the sight. I could only imagine how he would feel upon seeing this. The girl he fought a war for with a baby of another man, specifically the man he killed on the Trident. Now, Robert being here when this happens is going to be a very big issue when all is said and done, because he had an indiscriminate hatred for the Targaryen family in canon, even the ones that could be considered innocent, like Daenerys, someone who hadn't even known her own family, the Mad King and Rhaegar, someone who had never even set foot on Westeros since she was a baby when all that stuff happened. He carried that hatred for this family with him for years, even after the deaths of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and it's very clear that even as a young man, without all those years to let his pain stew and fester, he is still a very wrathful person. And I do believe that this will lead to a confrontation with Ned, where Robert wants to kill baby Jon. Even if he is the son of Lyanna, and even if Lyanna asks to keep him safe and protected, I believe it makes sense for Robert to want to kill Jon for a couple reasons. First, both Ned and Lyanna believed that Robert would have killed Jon had he found out the truth. If we're going off of the show, Lyanna literally says this on her deathbed.
If Robert finds out you'll kill him, you know he will. You have to protect him.
2, Jon is a threat to his throne, just like Viserys, Daenerys, and Rhaegar's other children. If word gets out that Rhaegar had another son, that could cause issues for him down the line in the political sense. Sure, Ned can still say that no one has to know about Jon and that he would raise him as a bastard, ignorant of his origins. But would Robert really want to take the chance of him finding out the truth one day from someone else? Because in reality, they don't know how many people actually knew about Jon. I mean, the Kingsguard was here at the Tower of Joy, so they must have known that Lyanna was pregnant with Rhaegar's child, right? Especially if they're trying so hard to defend this place. Then there's Wylla, the wet nurse who was also there at the Tower of Joy, helping out Lyanna. And now there's Ned, Robert, and Howland Reed. So there could be more people out there who know something. And with the risk of that knowledge potentially getting out through them, this could be a source of conflict down the line. Then reason 3 is Robert's mental state when all this happens. How he feels about Jon and his origins that contribute to his decision to kill him. What I mean by that is, how does he believe that Jon was conceived? In the show and the books, everyone thought that Lyanna was kidnapped and Rhaegar forced himself on her. We know from the show, via Bran, that they were actually in love, at least in that continuity. The books are still a bit unclear on that. But if we're rolling with the fact that they were in love, does Lyanna end up telling them the truth before she dies? Either way, I feel like things are going to go very badly when it comes to Robert. If she dies before she can tell the truth, does that mean that Robert goes on believing that Jon is just a child of SA, something that was forced on Lyanna by Rhaegar? He still maintains that image of Lyanna, the woman he loved, the woman he was supposed to marry, being violated and forced to bear this child. In my personal opinion, that would be enough for Robert to want to kill Jon, even if Lyanna asked for him to be kept safe. From his point of view, Jon wasn't born out of love or even duty, just pain. He's not something that Lyanna actively wanted to begin with, so why not get rid of him? Then there's what would happen if she did have enough time to tell them all the truth before she died. I think this would be even worse for Robert, to be honest. The truth would shatter his view of Lyanna. The knowledge that she never loved him, that he fought a war and claimed the Iron Throne in a rebellion where so many people died, all for a woman who didn't even want him and never did. I could see Robert's anger overshadowing any love he had for Lyanna, because all of his efforts become invalidated. And I think this would be something that he brings up to Ned as well as they prepare to leave the Tower of Joy. The whole reason this war even started was because Lyanna ran away. The reason Ned's father and brother died is because of her. Because they thought she'd been taken and tried to get her back only to be killed by the Mad King, which jump-started this conflict. There was so much death so this one baby could be born. And knowing how wrathful and vindictive Robert can be, not to mention a younger and more hot-blooded version of Robert, fresh from a war, I definitely see him trying to kill Jon no matter what. Ned would try to talk him out of it, of course, but a Robert mainly guided by rage and heartache might not be very receptive. So he hands off young Jon to Howland Reed so he can deal with Robert himself. Now we have a fight between Ned and his best friend. Under normal circumstances, I do think that a prime young Robert would most likely beat a young Eddard Stark, but these are different circumstances. For one, while he is still in his prime, he may not be operating at full capacity. He's still nursing his wounds from Rhaegar, and while I did say earlier that his injuries aren't as severe as canon, they are still there. Then there's also the fact that he could be injured again, or just exhausted from having to fight Arthur Dayne with Ned. Arthur Dayne is widely regarded as the best knight of his time, and in the books, Jaime says he could have killed 5 men with his left hand while peeing with his right. Even with help from Ned and Howland, it still would have been a challenge that wore Robert down a little bit. So Ned could have a chance here with a weakened young Robert, and that's not even mentioning the fact that Robert at this point may not even be thinking clearly. He's mainly being driven by anger, grief, and heartache, so it could cloud his judgment in a fight and cause him to make some less than optimal decisions. Meanwhile, Ned, who would still be reeling from the loss of his sister and the stress of having to fight his best friend now, would arguably have a cooler head than Robert, since he's never been that much of a hothead like his best friend. In addition to having a somewhat better mindset, he would also have the benefit of some special weapons to help him out in the conflict. He has Ice, the ancestral sword of House Stark, which is Valyrian steel, and known to not only be lighter than regular steel, but stronger than that as well. Then there is Dawn that he briefly took from Arthur Dayne at the Tower of Joy. Dawn is a sword that isn't Valyrian steel, but it's not exactly normal steel either. It shares properties with Valyrian steel, and was said to be forged from a fallen star. So the sword is literally otherworldly. Now, I'm not going to say that he's going to use both Ice and Dawn at the same time because that's stupid, and I don't think dual wielding is in Ned's arsenal as a person. What's more likely is that he just uses Dawn in the fight against Robert, since it's the one he has immediate access to, given that he probably still got Ice knocked out of his hand when he was fighting Arthur Dayne. So with a calmer mind, a special weapon, and Robert's injuries, possible exhaustion, and poor mental state, I'm going to say that Ned does come out with a win here. It's still going to be a bit of a close match though, because Robert is pretty strong, but at the end of the day, in order to save his sister's son, Ned puts an end to his brother in arms. And that's a lot of tragedy for one man to take on. Losing his sister, gaining a nephew he has to lie about in order to protect him, then having to kill his best friend in order to be able to even do such a thing in the first place. And since Robert at this point would have been made king, this also makes Ned a kingslayer, just like Jaime Lannister. Both committing the crime of regicide, both killing a madman to protect the lives of the innocent. Ned would be consumed by the guilt of killing his best friend. He fought with Robert, only to have to take his life later on. It would be a hard pill for him to swallow, and very traumatizing. But I ultimately think that Ned would keep pushing on, and feel that it was ultimately the right thing for him to do. It was Robert or his sister's son, and regardless of how angry he might have been with Lyanna, assuming he knew the truth about her and Rhaegar, I don't think it would have stopped him from defending the baby. I mean, this is who Ned is. He makes decisions based on what he believes is honorable or right. This is why he sides with Stannis over Renly, since it isn't right in his eyes for a younger brother to come before the older. This is why he tells Cersei to get out of Dodge before he tells Robert the truth about her and Jaime. Even though what she did was wrong, it isn't right that her children should be murdered like the Targaryen children of Rhaegar and Elia, which would have been even more motivation for Ned to stand against Robert in this moment to protect the baby. Like Elia's children, Aegon and Rhaenys, Rhaegar's siblings, Viserys and Daenerys, little Jon is innocent. He didn't ask to be born, and he doesn't have to be a threat. So yes, while Ned would ultimately feel guilty about what he did, I do think he would stand by his decision to put Robert down, as he would have felt he had no other choice. Now, this of course begs the question on if Ned would confess to killing Robert at some point in the story. And I would say no, because this would draw too much attention that Ned does not want. Robert loved Ned more than his own brothers, and if the two of them fought and tried to kill each other after they fought a war together to get his sister back, it must have been about something important. And I don't think even with Robert dead that Ned would want to risk exposing Jon this way. Stannis is still around, and with the death of Robert, who would have been king at this point, he would now sit the Iron Throne. Who's to say he may not see Jon, like Robert did, as a threat and potential competition and have to be dealt with. Then there are also the Lannisters, who would be something for him to think about. What Tywin had done to Rhaegar's family haunted Ned for years after the rebellion, and he would not want to risk that happening with Jon. So what I find likely is that he just pins Robert's death on Arthur Dayne, which would be pretty believable considering his reputation. And we do know that as honorable as Ned is, he is not above lying to protect the people he loves. He lies about Jon to the realm and even his own wife to keep him safe. He lies about trying to take the throne for himself in order to protect his daughters from the Lannisters. So lying about killing his best friend, while it would be hard and taxing on him internally, he would do it if it meant keeping his promise to Lyanna. That being said, what happens next in this story? Ned will eventually make his way back to King's Landing and inform everyone of Robert's death, supposedly at the hands of the Sword of the Morning. Stannis will become king, considering that he is Robert's heir and Renly is too young at this point to try and challenge him, let alone have an opinion on the succession. And I don't see the Lannisters trying to make a play for the throne themselves here. Instead, I believe that Tywin goes along with his original plan for Cersei. Instead of Robert, though, he pushes her towards Stannis so she can be his queen. This would make sense because around this point in history, Stannis wasn't married to Selyse Florent yet, so he is available for marriage. Now, when it comes to Stannis and his views on duty and how unyielding he can be, when he becomes king, he's probably gonna want to punish Jaime Lannister for killing King Aerys. Though you can say this act did help the rebels win, Jaime was still a sworn brother of the Kingsguard, who made an oath to protect King Aerys. He broke that oath and dishonored himself as a result. Regardless of the reason, this was a form of treason, and he broke the law.
You were a hero and a smuggler.
A good act does not wash out the bad, nor a bad the good.
So he may want to punish Jaime in some way, possibly executing him or sending him to the wall. However, despite what Stannis wants, I don't see this actually happening. While he is a stickler for the rules, I'm sure Jon Arryn, who would still be around, would probably counsel him against something like that, since it would guarantee making an enemy out of Tywin Lannister, whose gold they would definitely need. Then there's also the fact that what Stannis wants may actually be irrelevant in this case, considering that when Robert became king, he pretty much pardoned everyone that served Mad King Aerys, like Barristan Selmy, Maester Pycelle, and Jaime Lannister because he took out the opposition. If Robert has already pardoned Jaime for regicide, Stannis may abide by Robert's previous decree because technically Jaime has been excused for the crime. He may just settle for stripping Jaime of his white cloak and sending him back to Casterly Rock, banning him from King's Landing as well, and on the basis that he just can't trust Jaime to defend him as a Kingsguard. This would make Tywin pretty happy because he gets his heir back and his daughter gets to be the next queen of Westeros, so it's a win for him. Now, this probably wouldn't be the best marriage when it comes to Stannis and Cersei, though even with that being said, I do think it would still be a better relationship than she had with Robert, given that Stannis isn't a drunk and hung up on one woman, or a cheater like his brother Robert would have been. Given that he would actually take his duties to Cersei seriously, he probably would have also had some legitimate children with her as well, especially since if Jaime is going back to Casterly Rock and is banned from King's Landing, Cersei and him have no chance of producing any bastards in the royal line. Now from here, Ned would eventually go back north with a young Jon as well, and we'd be looking at a very different timeline as a result of all of this, with Stannis as king and possibly some legitimate Baratheon Lannister heirs. Jaime is now the heir to Casterly Rock again, and Ned is now holding two very dangerous secrets. But these are just things that I happen to think up today. You guys let me know what you thought in the comments and what changes you guys think would have made sense as well. For now though, hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe for more videos, and I will see you all next time.